Yet another Protect clan emerges from the shadows. But this one is a doozy.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another deck profile on the channel, and today we're gonna cover the last of the Protect clan that's gonna be introduced in Standard, and that is none other than Nubatama. And Nubatama has two interesting builds that we can discuss, and one of them is Magatsu Storm himself, and the other is the deck archetype around Kuchikiri Kongo. And today we're gonna cover Magatsu Storm, and in a couple of days we're gonna then talk about Kuchikiri Kongo. Personally, I'm more towards the side of Kuchikiri Kongo because of its interesting playstyle. But today we're gonna cover Magatsu Storm, and Magatsu Storm in its own regard is a very interesting concept in the way that it can multi-attack in a Protect clan. And that sounds a little bit weird, as you basically take the good parts of an extra clan and then take the good parts of the Protect clan and then you mesh them together and then you got basically this thing. So yeah, that sounds really insane, and we're gonna discover today how insane it can be with this deck profile and see how you can possibly pilot the deck and how you can do all these crazy interactions with the upcoming Nubatama support in the Miyaji Academy Cardfight Club set. So without further ado, let's jump right into this deck profile. The timetables are right around here. You know what to do, the drill is always the same, and let's jump right into it. For this Nubatama deck list, we run a total of 8 grade 3s, 12 grade 2s, 13 grade 1s, and 17 grade 0s. We run 4 copies of Covert Demonic Dragon Magatsu Storm. He's the main boss monster of the deck, and he enables us to multi-attack in a Protect clan. And it also allows us to get some easy free perfect guard skills against our opponent's Vanguard attack. So pretty damn useful against something like a Waterfall, for example. For the support grade 3, we run 4 copies of Stealth Dragon Voidmaster. This is a great card that enables us to bounce either a card from us back to our hand or bounce a opponent's unit back to their hand. And it also locks down interceptors for the turn that it is called. For the grade 2s, we run 4 copies of Stealth Dragon Magatsu Gil. This is an amazing card that either allows us to put out some pressure as soon as it becomes a 50k and potentially 23k attacker, and it allows us to draw a card. But it can also go into the soul to bounce something back, so it can start off Magatsu Storm's skill, but it also makes room at the same time to call another card to the field without calling on top of another unit. The other grade 2 that we run is Momentary Stealth Rogue Tsunamasa, and this is a great card that can power up the field. It can generate some soul, but it can also bounce itself back, so we have another card that can trigger Magatsu Storm's skill. And lastly, for the grade 2s, we run 4 copies of Stealth Dragon Dam Breach, and this is just a generic beat stick that is 15k basically for free whenever something is bounced, and it's gonna happen every turn, so it's a 15k attacker, potentially 23k attacker, and that can also be even higher when we stack some extra power on it with Magatsu Storm, for example. For the grade 1s, we run 4 copies of Stealth Dragon Magatsu Breath. This is our main grade 1 that can bounce back an entire column, and it also is a very strong booster as it gains the extra power every time that we call it to the field when we're sitting at the Magatsu Vanguard, but that's basically the whole point of the deck. The other grade 1 that we run is Stealth Rogue of the Night Sakura Fubuki, and this card allows us to generate free resource every time that we call it in the right situation, but seeing as how the deck functions, we can make that situation whenever we call this card to the field, and we can bounce it back to call it back once again to generate almost infinite resources. And we also run 3 copies of Tempest Stealth Rogue Fuki. This is just like Dumb Breach, the beat stick that can become a 14k attacker, and that's or a booster, and that's pretty damn good when we are in need of high pressure columns. As soon as the deck doesn't really make some high numbers, but with combination of Dumb Breach and Fuki and Magatsu Storm itself, we can pressure out some high numbers and a lot of attacks against our opponent, and that's the key of this deck. And lastly, we run 2 copies of Stealth Fiend Oboro card. Just as I said before, we are not really good with generating high power columns, but we have some nice niche interaction with a Oboro card in this deck, and it can make our Vanguard a little bit more threatening in situations where the Vanguard seems the least threatening. For the grade 0s, we run, of course, the V-Starter, Stealth Dragon Magatsu Wind, and for trigger lineup, we run the obvious 4 heal, 8 crit, 4 draws, making a total of 8 grade 3s, 12 grade 2s, 13 grade 1s, and 17 grade 0s. This Nubatama deck is a very combo heavy, as seen as it's all about bouncing back units to trigger Magatsu Storm's multi-attacking skill, and to overwhelm your opponent with devastating attacks. A couple of these interactions are between Magatsu Breath and other specific cards. By combining Magatsu Breath with Tsunamasa, you can make a 90k column that gives away 3k and bounce it back without wasting a soul, as seen as Magatsu Breath uses a soul that Tsunamasa is generating that soul when it was placed. If you combine Magatsu Breath with Sakura Fubuki, you can make a 22k column that generates a cycle and turns Soul into Counterblast. If you combine Magatsu Gale, Magatsu Storm, Magatsu Breath, Oboro Card, and Tsunamasa together, you can make a powerful multi-attack turn combined with a 79k Vanguard attack that I like to call Demonic Shadow Clone Jutsu. You call the following units to your field, then give your Vanguard 3k thanks to Tsunamasa. Then you place a borrow card on the field and doubles the Vanguard power to 30k. Then you attack for 19k and resolve Breath's skill to bounce the column. Then you attack with Magatsu Gale and resolve its skill to bounce back the borrow card. You now resolve Magatsu Storm's skill to call the new Tsunamasa and a borrow card. You resolve Tsunamasa to raise the Vanguard's power to 33k, and then Oboro Card's skill to double it to 66k. You now attack with the Vanguard, boosted by Oboro Card, and now you have a 79k attack Vanguard with a 13k rearguard and a 20k rearguard attack still left. Resources shouldn't be your main issue with this deck. We only have these 4 units that uses Counterblast, and Oboro Card isn't a skill you're going to use a lot. Same can be said about Voidmaster and Magatsu Storm, but that doesn't mean you're never going to use them, but don't expect you will needing to use them each and every turn. But in the off chance that we need to use, you have access to Sakura Fubuki that can almost generate infinite Counterblast. Soul is another thing that should be very manageable. Your grade 2 cards are basically Soul net 0, and by combining Gale with Tsunamasa, then he also becomes a net 0. And for Magatsu Storm, well, he is your typical rewrite into grade 3 skill that makes his own soul. The main strategy is to get the most value out of all your cards, because we can bounce cards back after attacks, means we can attack control clans like Kagero, Shadows and Arakami without being afraid that they destroy our units. The best attack pattern is the bounce back unit, so you have an entire column and one front row rearguard circle open, and what is left is a standing back row booster like the following scenario. Cards that make this possible are Magatsu Gale together with Tsunamasa or Magatsu Breath together with Voidmaster. Of course, there are way more options to do this, but that will be probably resulting in bouncing back or emptying out more than 3 units / circles. Although this deck has a lot of combo potential, it doesn't have a lot to go over concerning strategies. Most of your games, you're trying to get the most out of your units to trigger their skills as much as possible, and all the while you're playing around your opponent's mechanics. There may not be a specific strategy guideline for this deck, but you will learn how to play against each and every deck after learning how they work and how you can counter them with the versatile skills that this deck possesses. This deck doesn't really have a lot of room to change it up, but you can experiment with the following cards. Kokoshi Garas is a thing you can look at, but the deck will have less value out of it, seen as it can't clear the fields to get a lot of hand discard going on. And speaking of discard, Oboro Sakura might be an interesting tech option for more soul charging. Chigasumi, it might also be something to look at to have more power, but the discard can become an issue. Another great one you could run is Stealth Dragon Toga Juchi. This is a Japanese promo that has not yet been confirmed for the TCG, but he allows for a Sentinel restriction on your Vanguard attack. And if you combine it with the 79k Vanguard attack, that can become deadly really quickly. This Nubatama deck focuses on multi-attacking and playing around your opponent's mechanics. Although this deck doesn't have a real stopping power, the fact that it has many tools at its disposal means that it can make the best out of most situations, and it also is a very fun deck to play because of the many combos you can perform by chaining different cards together. And with that, we conclude this Nubatama Magatsu Storm deck profile, and as stated before, it's a very interesting deck. It has its ups and downs in the way that you should play it, as seen as it can look a little bit awkward and weird in the way that certain skills activate and how they might look on paper, but if you combine them in the right conditions together, then you can well have a well-defined killing machine in your hands at that point. And It depends really on the player that's gonna pilot these Nubatama decks, as they are very, very punishing to players that make misplays and do the wrong skill order or the wrong calls at the wrong times. But that honestly makes these decks very interesting in my eyes, as I like these high skill roof decks that really reward skilled players that use these decks in the right way. And that is something that I like to see a lot more in a lot more decks and a lot more clans. But I've talked about this in many other videos of how I feel about these kinds of decks or archetypes or cards. But that's all about this video that I can talk about. You know the drill, guys. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell button down below if you're interested in any of these kinds of the information or videos or whatnot, as we're gonna cover a lot more. As stated before in this video, I'm gonna do a Kiri Congo deck profiles very soon, but I also have things to talk about like Alfred, Soul Saver, Mages, Witches, and all those good stuff. So you know what you can expect from me in the upcoming days. But as always, guys, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I'll see you guys in the next one.